I am Lois, 58 years old, and today I watched my only son get married. After raising James alone since he was 8, this should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I had dreamed of welcoming a daughter into our small family for years. Instead, I found myself standing by a bathroom wall, a placement my new daughter-in-law Amanda insisted upon, so my aging face would not ruin their wedding photos. If you have ever felt pushed aside by someone you were trying to welcome into your family, let me know in the comments and hit that subscribe button as I share how I stood up for myself on what should have been the happiest day of our lives. My journey as a single mother began when my husband David suddenly passed away from a heart attack. James was only 8 years old at the time. I still remember his confused little face at the funeral, not fully understanding that his father was never coming home. That day I made a silent promise to David that I would give our son the best life possible, regardless of what sacrifices I had to make. And sacrifice I did. With only my teaching salary to rely on, I took on tutoring jobs during evenings and weekends. During summer breaks, I worked administrative positions to make extra money. Every spare dollar went toward providing James with opportunities, baseball camp, science club memberships, and the saxophone lessons he begged for in middle school, even though the noise nearly drove our neighbors insane. When James was 11, I made the difficult decision to sell our family home and move to a smaller house in a better school district. The commute to my teaching job doubled, but James would have access to advanced classes that would challenge his bright mind. My friends thought I was being overprotective when I researched every teacher he might have, but I wanted to ensure he had mentors who would recognize his potential. Through his teenage years, James and I maintained a close bond that my friends with teenagers envied. While he certainly had his moments of adolescent rebellion, like the time he snuck out to attend a concert with friends and came home with his first tattoo, he always knew he could talk to me about anything. We had Sunday morning pancake traditions, where we would sit at our kitchen table sharing our wins and challenges from the week. Even during his moodiest phase, he never missed our Sunday pancakes. When James received his college acceptance letters, I burst into tears of pride. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, all offering partial scholarships to my brilliant son. He ultimately chose Stanford Law, following in his father's footsteps. The day I dropped him off at his dormitory was one of the hardest of my life. My car felt unbearably empty on the drive home, and our house echoed with his absence. During his college years, James called religiously every Wednesday evening. As law school consumed more of his time, those calls sometimes shortened, but they remained consistent. When he secured an internship at Preston Wallace & Baker, one of the most prestigious firms in Boston, I drove 6 hours just to take him to dinner and celebrate. The pride in his eyes when he showed me his office badge made every sacrifice worthwhile. After graduating with honors, James accepted a full-time position at the same firm. His career flourished quickly, and I watched from a distance as my son transformed from an eager new associate to a respected attorney on track for early partnership. Despite his increasingly demanding schedule, we maintained our close relationship. He would drive down to visit at least once a month, and I made the trip to Boston for his birthday every year. The first sign of change came about 2 years ago when James missed our standing monthly dinner for the first time without calling. When he finally returned my concerned messages 3 days later, his voice had a different quality, distracted but happy. He apologized profusely and then shared his news he had met someone special. Her name was Amanda, and from the way he described her, she walked on water. I was thrilled for him, of course. After focusing so intensely on his career, James deserved to find love. Over the following weeks, James became increasingly difficult to reach. Our Wednesday calls became sporadic, often rescheduled or missed entirely. When we did speak, his conversations centered around Amanda, her job as a gallery curator, her sophisticated taste, her connections in Boston society. I listened enthusiastically, genuinely happy that my son had found someone who excited him so much. Still, I noticed subtle changes in James himself. He began referring to his upbringing as humble beginnings, rather than the loving, stable home I had worked so hard to provide. He mentioned upgrading his wardrobe under Amanda's guidance and joining a country club where her family had been members for generations. While none of these changes were inherently concerning, the slightly apologetic tone when he described his life before Amanda gave me pause. Nevertheless, I reminded myself that relationships change people often for the better. James sounded happy, and his happiness had always been my primary concern. When he finally suggested I meet Amanda during their upcoming trip to visit me, I spent days preparing. I wanted so badly to welcome this woman who had captured my son's heart. Little did I know that this meeting would be the first of many disappointments, slowly revealing the woman who would eventually ask me to stand by a bathroom wall at my only child's wedding. I will never forget the day I first met Amanda. James had suggested dinner at Laurent, the most expensive restaurant in our area. I knew immediately this was Amanda's choice, as my son was well aware of my preference for the casual Italian place where the owner still pinched his cheeks and remembered his childhood orders. I arrived 15 minutes early, nervous but excited. I had splurged on a new blouse and even visited the salon for a proper styling instead of my usual self-managed bob. I wanted to make a good impression on the woman who might one day be my daughter-in-law. James arrived with Amanda on his arm, and I barely recognized my son. Gone were his slightly rumpled Oxford shirts and the warm, open smile that had charmed his teachers throughout his school years. This James wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and his smile seemed practiced cautious. Amanda was undeniably beautiful, with the kind of polished appearance that comes from a lifetime of privilege. Her caramel-highlighted hair fell in perfect waves around a heart-shaped face, and her posture suggested years of finishing school or ballet training. When she extended her hand instead of accepting my offered hug, I felt the first prickle of unease. Throughout dinner, I worked hard to establish a connection. I asked about her work at the gallery, her family, her interests. Her answers were polite, but clipped, each response seeming to close rather than open avenues for conversation. When she spoke to James, however, her entire demeanor transformed. She touched his arm frequently, laughed at his jokes, and engaged him in discussions about people and places I knew nothing about. As I watched them interact, I realized Amanda had barely asked me a single question about myself or my relationship with James. When I mentioned a childhood story about James' attempt to start a neighborhood newspaper at age 10, Amanda smiled tightly and redirected the conversation to an upcoming charity gala. Near the end of the meal, Amanda excused herself to the restroom, and I seized the opportunity to check in with my son. "She seems very sophisticated," I offered, trying to be diplomatic. "Isn't she amazing, Mom?" James beamed, oblivious to my reservation. "Her family knows everyone in Boston. Her father practically got me an introduction to the senior partners at Kensington and Myers." "Are you thinking of changing firms?" I asked, surprised. "Amanda thinks I should consider it. Higher profile, better connections." He shrugged, as if his 5-year career plan had always been negotiable. Before I could respond, Amanda returned, sliding gracefully into her seat and immediately placing her hand possessively over James. The conversation turned to their hotel accommodations, and I realized with a start that James was not staying in his childhood bedroom as he always had during visits home. As we parted in the parking lot, Amanda made what would be the first of many subtly undermining comments. "Your blouse is such a lovely color for a woman of your age, Lois. So appropriate," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. 2 weeks later, hoping to establish a warmer relationship, I invited them for dinner at my home. I spent days planning a menu that would impress without seeming like I was trying too hard, and even updated some of my living room decor. From the moment they arrived, Amanda's discomfort was palpable. Her eyes scanned my modest living room with barely concealed judgment. When she thought I was in the kitchen, I overheard her whisper to James, "You really grew up here. It's so quaint." Throughout the evening, Amanda made comments about my charming decor choices and interesting food selections, each compliment barbed with condescension. When I brought out photo albums after dinner, hoping to share some of James' treasured memories, Amanda suddenly developed a headache and suggested they leave early. As the months progressed, I made numerous attempts to bond with Amanda. I invited her for lunch when she and James visited, suggested we go shopping together, and even offered to help with any preliminary wedding planning they might be considering. Each overture was politely declined with a transparent excuse. During one visit, I accidentally walked in on Amanda and James having a heated discussion in my kitchen. I caught only a fragment of Amanda's whispered admonishment. "I don't understand why we have to visit so often. You said yourself you've outgrown this life." James caught sight of me hovering in the doorway and immediately changed the subject, but the damage was done. That night, after they left for their hotel, I cried for the first time since James had introduced me to Amanda. I was losing my son, not to a woman who loved him and merely needed to establish boundaries, but to someone who seemed to view his background, and by extension me, as something shameful to be overcome. Still, I told myself I was overreacting. Perhaps Amanda was just insecure about her place in James' life and would warm up once she felt more secure in their relationship. I resolved to keep trying to be patient, to focus on my son's obvious happiness whenever he looked at her. When James called 6 months later to announce their engagement, I pushed aside my reservations and expressed genuine delight. My son was getting married, and I was determined to embrace Amanda as the daughter I had never had, regardless of her apparent disdain for me. If only I had known then how much worse things would get during the wedding planning, I might have been better prepared for the bathroom wall incident that would eventually force me to make one of the most difficult decisions of my life. The wedding planning process made one thing abundantly clear: I was not considered an important part of my son's new life. What should have been a joyful time of collaboration and family bonding instead became a series of painful exclusions that left me feeling increasingly invisible. The first indication came when I received an elaborate email from Amanda's mother, Kathleen, 3 weeks after the engagement announcement. The message detailed all major decisions already made regarding the wedding venue, the exclusive Hamilton Club where Amanda's parents were founding members, date conflicting with the annual memorial service I attended for my late husband, though I didn't mention this color scheme, floral arrangements, and catering selections. The email concluded with a note that my financial contribution would not be necessary, as the Prestons were happy to give the children the wedding they deserve. I swallowed my hurt and called James, gently suggesting that I would love to be involved in some aspect of the planning. Perhaps I could help address invitations or coordinate with certain vendors. "Amanda's mom has it all under control, Mom," James said, his tone slightly distracted, as if he was multitasking during our call. "You know how these society weddings are. Lots of protocols and traditions. Best to let the Prestons handle it since they know all the right people." I wanted to remind him that this was his wedding too, not merely a society event for the Preston family to showcase. Instead, I offered something more personal. "I still have your grandmother's pearl earrings and cufflinks that she and Grandpa wore at their wedding. They've been passed down through 4 generations of weddings in our family. Perhaps Amanda might like to incorporate them as her something old." The awkward pause told me everything before James even spoke. Actually, Amanda already has her great-grandmother's diamond tiara and her mother's veil, and her jewelry will be from Cartier to match the specific shade of her dress. But thanks for offering, Mom. A week later, I received a formal save-the-date card in the mail, the same one apparently sent to all guests with no personal note acknowledging that I was the mothers of the groom. When I called James to discuss mother of the groom attire, hoping to coordinate appropriately with the wedding colors, Amanda answered his phone. "James is in meetings all day," she informed me, her tone efficient. "About your dress, we're requesting that mothers wear champagne or pale gold tones, nothing too bold or attention-grabbing. The focus should be on the bridal party, of course." "Of course," I echoed, swallowing my discomfort at being given wardrobe directives. "Is there a particular style that would complement what you and the bridal party are wearing? Something age-appropriate and conservative would be best," Amanda replied. "We're going for a very specific aesthetic in the photographs." The conversation left me standing in my bedroom, staring at my closet with tears in my eyes. I had always pictured being involved in my son's wedding, imagined the special moments we would share. Instead, I felt like an afterthought, a potential embarrassment to be managed. As the months progressed, the exclusions multiplied. I learned about the engagement party after seeing photos posted on social media, an oversight James later attributed to his hectic work schedule. When I mentioned the traditional mother-son dance song selection, hoping to suggest the lullaby I had sung to him throughout childhood, James informed me that Amanda had already selected an updated alternative with their wedding planner. Most painful was discovering that a pre-wedding brunch had occurred without my knowledge. My neighbor Susan, whose daughter was loosely connected to Amanda's social circle, asked how I'd enjoyed the event, not realizing I hadn't been invited. When I questioned James about it, he seemed genuinely confused. "I thought Mom Preston included you on the email invitation," he said, sounding distracted. "It was just a small thing for the wedding party and immediate family." "I am immediate family, James," I reminded him gently. "You know what I mean, Mom. Amanda's immediate family. Her sisters were hosting it." The dismissive way he categorized me as separate from immediate family pierced my heart. By the time the rehearsal dinner approached, the one event traditionally hosted by the groom's family, I was informed by Kathleen Preston that they had taken the liberty of arranging it at their country club since they had connections that could secure the ideal private room. My role, it seemed, was merely to provide a list of relatives from my side who should be included. Throughout all of these disappointments, I struggled with how to respond. Should I assert myself more forcefully, create conflict that might further alienate me from my son, or should I continue to accommodate every slight in the hope of preserving my relationship with James? During a rare moment alone with my son, about a month before the wedding, I attempted to express my feelings. "James, I feel like I've been pushed aside during this entire wedding process." I admitted, keeping my tone even. "I understand that Amanda's family has certain expectations, but I'm your mother. I want to be part of your special day in a meaningful way." James sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart ache. "You're being too sensitive, Mom," he said finally. "Everyone has a role to play, and the Prestons have experience with these kinds of social events. It's nothing personal." But it was personal. Every exclusion, every dismissal of family traditions, every instance where my input was deemed unnecessary or unsuitable felt deliberately designed to minimize my importance in my son's life. Still, I told myself that the wedding was just one day. Once James and Amanda were married, perhaps things would settle into a new normal, where I could rebuild my relationship with my son and gradually develop a warmer connection with my daughter-in-law. With this hope sustaining me, I selected a modest but elegant champagne-colored dress for the wedding, purchased a pearl necklace that wouldn't outshine the bridal party, but would help me feel confident, and wrapped my special gift, the deed to our family vacation home on Lake Michigan, the place where James had spent his happiest childhood summers. As the wedding day approached, I tamped down my hurt feelings and focused on the joy of seeing my son marry. I could never have imagined that the actual wedding day would bring an insult so profound that it would finally break my pattern of silent accommodation and force me to take a stand that would change our family forever. The morning of James and Amanda's wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect June day that wedding photographers dream about. I woke early, my stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Despite all the disappointments during the planning process, this was still my only child's wedding day. I was determined to focus on the joy of the occasion rather than my hurt feelings. I took extra care with my appearance, wanting to look my best without drawing any unwanted attention. My champagne-colored dress fit perfectly, and the pearl necklace I had purchased for the occasion complemented it beautifully. I arranged my hair in a simple updo, applied my makeup with a careful hand, and took a moment to look at myself in the mirror. At 58, I was no longer young, but I looked elegant and appropriate for a mother of the groom. David would have been proud to stand beside me today, I thought, blinking back tears. Before leaving my hotel room, I carefully placed the gift box containing the deed to our family vacation home on my bed while I gathered my purse and wrap. The lakeside cottage had been in my husband's family for generations. James had spent every summer of his childhood there, learning to swim in the clear waters, roasting marshmallows on the beach, and later as a teenager having his first experiences with independence as he made friends with other summer residents. When David died, I had managed to hold on to the property despite financial pressures, knowing how much it meant to both of us. Transferring ownership to James and Amanda was the most significant gift I could offer. It represented not just substantial financial value, but our family history and my blessing on their new life together. I had spent weeks with a lawyer ensuring the deed transfer was properly prepared and had the paperwork beautifully bound in a blue leather portfolio wrapped in silver paper with a simple white ribbon. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the Hamilton Club, with the reception to follow immediately in the grand ballroom. I arrived an hour early as requested for family photographs, only to be told by the wedding coordinator that the Preston family photographs were happening first, and I should wait in the parlor until called. After 45 minutes of waiting, the coordinator finally returned, looking flustered. "Mrs. Winters, I am so sorry, but it seems there was a miscommunication. The photographer is now taking the bride and groom portraits, and we've run out of time for the additional family groupings before the ceremony. We'll try to fit them in during the reception." I swallowed my disappointment and nodded understanding. This was just one more slight in a long series of them. I would focus on the ceremony itself. The Hamilton Club ballroom had been transformed into a vision of elegance. White roses and silver accents adorned every surface, and delicate crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering guests. I was directed to my seat in the front row, but noticed immediately that my designated chair was not centered as one might expect for the mother of the groom, but off to the far side, while a group of seats in the prime central location were marked with "Reserved for Preston Family" placards. Throughout the beautiful ceremony, I alternated between joy at seeing my son so handsome in his tuxedo and the persistent feeling that I was more spectator than participant in this momentous family event. When the minister asked who gives this woman in marriage, Amanda's father responded with a lengthy rehearsed speech about their family legacy and blessing. When James recited his vows, he thanked Amanda's parents by name for welcoming him into their family. My presence went unacknowledged. Still, when James and Amanda were pronounced husband and wife, my eyes filled with tears of genuine happiness. Whatever my feelings about how I'd been treated, my son was married, and I would continue trying to build bridges with my new daughter-in-law. As guests transitioned to the reception area for cocktails, while the ballroom was reset, I found myself alone searching for familiar faces. None of my close friends had been included on the tight guest list, and the few relatives from our side seemed to be clustered together near the bar, looking as out of place as I felt among Boston's elite. I spotted James across the room surrounded by Amanda's friends, his hand resting comfortably on his new wife's waist. When he caught my eye, he smiled and gave a small wave, but made no move to come speak with me. I understood he was busy with well-wishers, but the distance between us felt both physical and symbolic. When the doors to the reception ballroom finally opened, I followed the crowd inside, pausing at the elaborately calligraphed seating chart to find my table assignment. I scanned the chart twice before finally locating my name at table 19. Surprised, I looked around the ballroom counting the tables. Table 1, where the bridegroom and their parents would typically sit, was positioned centrally beneath a cascade of white flowers. Tables 2 through 10 formed a circle around it, clearly the premium seating for honored guests. I made my way toward the higher-numbered tables, each step taking me farther from the center of the room. Table 19, I discovered, was positioned in the far corner of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a large column and immediately adjacent to the restrooms. My heart sank as I approached and saw that none of my relatives were seated with me. Instead, my table mates appeared to be distant acquaintances of the Preston family, all significantly older than most guests. As I stood uncertainly beside the table, Amanda appeared at my elbow looking radiant in her designer gown. "Lois, there's been a small change," she said, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes cold. "We need you to sit at table 23 instead." She gestured toward an even more isolated table, this one directly beside the swinging doors that led to the restroom corridor. "Table 23, I repeated, confused. "But the seating chart says I'm at table 19. "Yes, well, we had to make some last-minute adjustments. Table 23 is actually perfect for you." She lowered her voice as if sharing a confidence. "Can you stand by the bathroom wall so you don't ruin the wedding photos with your age? The photographers will be circulating during dinner, and that corner won't be featured in the album." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Had my son's new wife really just told me that my aging face would ruin their wedding photographs, that I needed to be hidden away by the bathroom like some embarrassing family secret? "I see." I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Wonderful." Amanda beamed, already turning away. "Oh, and we placed your gift with the others on the display table near the entrance. Such a small box. I hope it's something meaningful rather than just a check." As she glided away to greet more socially acceptable guests, I stood frozen, her casual cruelty still ringing in my ears. In that moment, something inside me, something that had been bending and accommodating and making excuses for months, finally broke. With a clarity I hadn't felt in years, I knew I could not and would not accept this treatment. This wasn't about a seating arrangement or photographs. This was about fundamental respect and whether I would allow myself to be erased from my own son's life. With my head held high, I walked across the ballroom toward the gift table. Conversations hummed around me, champagne glasses clinked, but I moved with singular purpose. Among the pile of elaborately wrapped packages, I located the silver-wrapped box containing the deed to the vacation home, my heartfelt gift and symbol of welcome to the family Amanda clearly did not want me to be part of. I picked up the box and tucked it under my arm. For a brief moment, I scanned the room for James, finding him laughing with Amanda's father near the head table. He caught my eye again, and this time lifted his champagne glass in a small toast. He had no idea what had just transpired with his new wife. I could have created a scene. I could have marched up to James and repeated Amanda's words verbatim. I could have demanded an apology or exposed her behavior to the assembled guests. Instead, I chose my dignity. Without speaking to anyone, I walked steadily toward the exit. As I passed the coat check attendant, I noticed his curious glance at the gift box under my arm. "Change of plans," I said softly, managing a small smile. The evening air felt cool against my flushed face as I stepped outside. Standing on the steps of the Hamilton Club, I took a deep breath, feeling simultaneously heartbroken and strangely liberated. My son had married a woman who thought I was too old and unsightly to appear in their wedding photos, a woman who had systematically pushed me to the margins of their life together, a woman who had just made it abundantly clear that I would never be welcomed as a true member of their family. The decision to leave wasn't about punishing James or retaliating against Amanda. It was about finally acknowledging my own worth. I would not stay where I wasn't wanted. I would not pretend that being relegated to the bathroom wall was acceptable treatment. With my gift and my dignity intact, I descended the steps and walked to my car. As I drove away from my son's wedding reception, tears blurred my vision, but my resolve remained firm. The vacation home would remain in my possession, and for the first time in our relationship, my son would have to confront the consequences of allowing me to be disrespected. I had been home for nearly 4 hours when my phone began ringing incessantly. I had turned it off during the ceremony and forgotten to turn it back on until I was safely in my living room, shoes kicked off, and a cup of tea cooling beside me. When I finally checked the screen, I had 17 missed calls from James and a string of increasingly urgent text messages. "Mom, where are you? Are you okay? No one can find you. Please call me ASAP. Mom, seriously, what's going on? Why did you take your gift and leave Amanda is upset?" The last message made me laugh bitterly. Amanda was upset. After what she had said to me, I let the phone ring through to voicemail twice more before finally answering. "Mom, where are you? What happened?" James' voice was a mixture of concern and irritation. "I'm home, James," I replied calmly. "Home. You left without saying anything. We have the mother-son dance coming up, and you're just gone." I closed my eyes, gathering my strength. "James, I was told by your wife that I needed to sit by the bathroom wall so I wouldn't ruin your wedding photos with my age." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "What? No, there's been some misunderstanding. Amanda would never say something like that." "She did say exactly that, James. Those were her precise words to me less than 5 hours ago." "Mom, you must have misheard or misinterpreted." "I did not mishear." I interrupted, my voice firmer than I'd ever used with my son. "Your wife told me to stand by the bathroom wall because my age would ruin your wedding photos. After months of being excluded from wedding planning, finding out about events after they happened, and being treated like an inconvenience rather than your mother, this was the final straw." "But the gift, he asked, his voice smaller now. "Why did you take back your gift?" "The gift was a symbol of welcoming Amanda into our family," I explained. "It's difficult to welcome someone who has made it abundantly clear that she doesn't want me to be part of your lives." "That's not fair, Mom. Amanda has been trying—" "No, James, she hasn't." The words came out more sharply than I intended, but I continued. "I have made every effort to connect with Amanda. I've overlooked slights, accepted exclusion, changed my appearance to suit her preferences, and remained silent when family traditions were dismissed. In return, I've been treated as an embarrassment to be hidden away." Another long silence followed before James spoke again, his tone defensive. "I think we need to talk about this with Amanda. She says you misunderstood her intentions completely." "I'm happy to have that conversation," I replied, "but not tonight. Tonight I need you to respect my decision to remove myself from a situation where I was being disrespected." The next morning my doorbell rang at an unreasonably early hour. I opened it to find James on my doorstep, still in his clothes from the night before, looking exhausted and agitated. Amanda stood slightly behind him. Her perfect wedding makeup now smudged her expression, a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Mom, we need to talk about this," James said without preamble, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Amanda followed her eyes, scanning my living room with the same barely concealed disdain as always. "Please sit down," I offered, maintaining my composure. Once we were all seated, James looked between Amanda and me expectantly. "Amanda has something she wants to say." Amanda leaned forward, her hands clasped in what appeared to be a rehearsed posture of sincerity. "Lois, I'm so sorry if my words yesterday were misconstrued. I was simply trying to ensure that everything was perfect for our special day. The lighting near those tables can be quite harsh, and I was only thinking of how the photographs would turn out for everyone." I regarded her steadily. "Amanda, you specifically mentioned my age as the reason I should stand by the bathroom wall." "I think in the stress of the moment you may have misheard," she countered smoothly. "I would never deliberately hurt the mother of my husband." James jumped in, clearly relieved by this explanation. "See, Mom, it was just a misunderstanding during a hectic day." I took a deep breath, knowing this moment would define our relationship moving forward. "James, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer. Do you believe that I, the woman who raised you, who has never lied to you, would fabricate such a specific and hurtful comment?" James flushed, looking uncomfortable. "Furthermore," I continued, "does it seem consistent with how I've been treated throughout this entire wedding process? Being excluded from planning, learning about family events after they occurred, being seated at the furthest table from you." "Those were just logistical decisions," Amanda interjected quickly. "Nothing personal." "They felt very personal," I replied, "and they reveal a pattern that culminated in yesterday's incident." James ran a hand through his hair, looking torn. "What was in the gift box, Mom? Everyone said you took it and left." This was the moment. "It was the deed to the Lake Michigan vacation home. I was transferring ownership to you both as a wedding present." Amanda's expression changed instantly, her eyes widening with unmistakable interest. "The lakeside property, the one in that exclusive community?" James looked stunned. "Mom, you've always said that house would stay in the family forever. Dad wanted—" "Your father wanted it to pass to you eventually," I confirmed, "and I decided your wedding was the right time, but a gift that's significant requires mutual respect." "Of course we respect you," Amanda said quickly, her tone suddenly warm. "Families have misunderstandings. We're all just getting used to our new dynamics." I looked directly at her, finally ready to set clear boundaries. Respectfully, Amanda telling someone to hide by the bathroom wall because their age will ruin photographs isn't a misunderstanding. It's deliberate cruelty. James looked stricken, glancing between his wife and me. "Amanda, did you really say that to my mother?" For a brief moment, Amanda's mask slipped, revealing irritation before she recovered. "I may have expressed concern about the photography layout in a clumsy way. If so, I sincerely apologize." It wasn't a real admission or a genuine apology, but it was as close as she would come. "I accept that you believe your apology is sufficient," I said carefully. "But moving forward, I need to be treated with basic respect. I'm not asking to be involved in every decision you make as a couple. I'm simply asking to be treated as a valued family member rather than an inconvenience." James reached for my hand. "Mom, of course you're valued. I never meant for you to feel otherwise." "But I have felt otherwise, James, for months now. And when you didn't include me in important events, when you dismissed my concerns as being too sensitive, you contributed to that feeling." The conversation continued in circles for another hour. Amanda maintaining her position that had misunderstood her intentions, James caught between his wife and his mother, and me finally giving voice to months of accumulated hurts. In the end, we reached an uneasy truce. The deed to the vacation home remained in my possession, a decision that clearly disappointed Amanda. James promised to be more attentive to my inclusion in their lives, and I made it clear that while I would always love my son, I would no longer accept being treated as an afterthought. As they prepared to leave for their honeymoon the next day, James hugged me tightly at the door. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. "I love you too," I replied, enough to stand up for myself. As I watched them drive away, I felt an unexpected lightness. The coming months would be challenging as we navigated this new reality, but for the first time since James had met Amanda, I had spoken my truth. The wedding gift remained with me, and so did my self-respect. The first holiday after the wedding was Thanksgiving, and for the first time in James' life, he would not be celebrating with me. The invitation to join them at the Prestons' estate had been extended as an apparent olive branch, but the thought of sitting at their table being subtly reminded of my outsider status held no appeal. "You'll be spending Thanksgiving with friends this year," I told James during one of our now less frequent phone calls. "You enjoy your first holiday as a married couple." His disappointment seemed genuine, but not enough to change the plans already made with his in-laws. As I hung up the phone, I realized this was just the first of many traditions that would change as our relationship evolved. The thought brought both sadness and a strange sense of liberation. I was entering a new chapter of my life, one where I would need to build meaning and connection beyond my identity as James' mother. The weeks following the wedding incident unfolded in a blur of conflicting emotions. There were moments when the silence of my home felt deafening, when I would walk past James's old bedroom and feel a physical ache in my chest. Other times, I experienced unexpected surges of something like relief, the freedom from constantly monitoring my words and actions to avoid causing offense. Initially, I withdrew from my usual activities. I called in sick to my part-time job at the local library, declined invitations from friends, and spent too many evenings staring listlessly at television shows I wasn't really watching. The voice in my head kept replaying every interaction with Amanda, wondering if I could have done something differently to build a better relationship. 2 weeks of this solitary rumination came to an abrupt end when my oldest friend Diane used her spare key to let herself into my house after I'd ignored several of her calls. "Enough wallowing," she announced, pulling open my curtains to let in the summer sunshine. "Get dressed. We're having lunch, and you're going to tell me everything." Over a long lunch at our favorite cafe, I poured out the entire story, from the first meeting with Amanda through the wedding day humiliation and its aftermath. Diane listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly indignant. "Let me get this straight," she said when I'd finished. "This woman told you to stand by the bathroom so your age wouldn't ruin their photos, and your son is still trying to paint it as a misunderstanding." When she put it so bluntly, the situation's absurdity struck me. A startled laugh escaped me, my first genuine laugh in weeks. "It does sound ridiculous when you say it out loud," I admitted. "It's not ridiculous, Lois. It's cruel," Diane corrected firmly. "And you absolutely did the right thing by leaving and taking your gift back. The only mistake you made was putting up with smaller versions of this treatment for so long." Her validation loosened something tight in my chest. Perhaps I wasn't overreacting. Perhaps my feelings were entirely justified. "James has always been the center of my world," I said softly. "After David died, everything I did was for him. I'm not sure who I am if I'm not primarily his mother." "You're Lois Winters," Diane replied without hesitation. The woman who organized the most successful library fundraiser in town history, the friend who drove me to every chemo appointment when I had breast cancer, the talented gardener whose roses have won blue ribbons 3 years running. You're so much more than just James's mother, and it's time you remembered that. That conversation marked a turning point in my post-wedding recovery. With Diane's encouragement, I joined a grief support group, not to process new grief over my husband, but to address the loss of the relationship I'd thought I would have with my son and his wife. In the support group, I met Eleanor, another mother, whose daughter had married a controlling husband who gradually isolated her from her family. Eleanor's story was both heartbreaking and oddly comforting, proof that I wasn't alone in experiencing this particular pain. The hardest part, Eleanor shared during one session, was accepting that I couldn't fix it by trying harder or being better somehow. My daughter's relationship with her husband was beyond my control. Those words resonated deeply. I had been operating under the assumption that if I just found the right approach with Amanda, if I was more accommodating, less intrusive, better dressed, more sophisticated, she would eventually accept me. Eleanor's insight helped me recognize the futility of that belief. With this new understanding, I began rebuilding my life with intention. I increased my hours at the library, finding satisfaction in recommending books to patrons and organizing community events. I joined a garden club that met weekly, sharing my knowledge of perennials while learning about native plant landscaping. I even accepted an invitation to dinner from Walter, a kind widower who frequented the library's history section. When James called, I kept our conversations positive but brief. I no longer volunteered information about my schedule or asked leading questions about when they might visit. Instead, I adopted a friendly but slightly distant tone that matched the relationship he and Amanda seemed to prefer. 3 months after the wedding, I decided to spend a week at the lake house, the property I had nearly given away. I hadn't visited since before David's death, finding the memories too painful to face alone. Now, however, it felt important to reclaim this piece of my history. The small cedar-sided cottage looked just as it had throughout James's childhood, though the nearby properties had grown increasingly elaborate as the area became more exclusive. Inside, everything was draped in dust covers, preserving the modest but comfortable furnishings that had witnessed so many family gatherings. I spent the first day opening windows, clearing cobwebs, and reacquainting myself with each room. In James's old bedroom, nautical-themed wallpaper still decorated the walls, and a collection of beach glass lined the windowsill. I sat on the edge of his twin bed, running my hand over the faded quilt, remembering the little boy who had once insisted on sailing to sleep in this room. That night, I sat on the deck overlooking the lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and purple. For the first time since the wedding, I cried without restraint. For the relationship with my son that had changed irrevocably, for the daughter-in-law I would never have, for the grandchildren who might grow up viewing me as peripheral rather than central to their lives. But when the tears finally subsided, I felt something unexpected, a sense of possibility. This house which I had preserved for James could now be a sanctuary for me. The memories here weren't only about being a mother and wife. They were also about the woman who had swum in this lake at sunrise, who had written poetry on this very deck, who had dreams beyond her family roles. Returning home after that week at the lake, I felt a shift in my perspective. I began making changes to my house that I had long postponed, repainting the living room a bold sage green instead of the neutral beige that had been a compromise with David's more conservative tastes. I converted James's old bedroom into an art studio where I could return to the watercolor painting I had abandoned after college. I joined a women's hiking group that met every Saturday morning, discovering muscles I hadn't used in years and vistas I had never appreciated, despite living in the area for decades. When the holidays approached, I accepted an invitation to join Diane's extended family for Thanksgiving, rather than sitting home alone. 6 months after the wedding, I realized with surprise that I had gone 3 weeks without crying over James and Amanda. I had spoken to my son only twice during that period, brief, cordial calls that left me neither elated nor devastated. I was building a life that no longer revolved around his approval or attention. In therapy sessions, which I had begun attending regularly, I explored the complex emotions of this transition. My therapist, Dr. Marshall, helped me recognize that creating boundaries wasn't abandoning my son, but rather establishing a healthier relationship pattern. "You're modeling self-respect," she pointed out. "That's a powerful example for James, even if he doesn't recognize it yet." I wasn't sure if James would ever fully understand why I had walked out of his wedding reception, or why I now maintained a certain emotional distance, but I was learning that his understanding wasn't required for my healing. What mattered was that I had finally recognized my own worth, independent of my role in his life. The mother who would have stood silently by the bathroom wall, accepting invisibility for the sake of peace, was gone. In her place was a woman who had discovered, somewhat to her own surprise, that life could flourish in unexpected ways even after such profound disappointment. As winter gave way to spring, I planted new varieties in my garden, enrolled in a pottery class at the community center, and began volunteering at a literacy program for immigrant families. Each new activity and connection wove another strand into the tapestry of my post-James-centric life. I was no longer just surviving the aftermath of the wedding incident. I was genuinely thriving. Eleanor from my support group observed the change during our coffee meeting one rainy April afternoon. "You look different," she said, studying my face. "More present somehow, like you've fully arrived in your own life." Her words captured exactly how I felt. For the first time since David's death, perhaps even before I was living primarily for myself rather than in service to others. The discovery was both exhilarating and occasionally guilt-inducing, a contradiction Dr. Marshall assured me was perfectly normal for women of our generation. "You've spent decades putting everyone else's needs before your own," she reminded me. "Learning to prioritize yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for genuine well-being." This hard-won wisdom would soon be tested in ways I couldn't have anticipated as James's carefully constructed new life began showing signs of strain. The first indication that all was not well in James and Amanda's marriage came unexpectedly on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in October, 6 months after their wedding. I was arranging a new pottery display at the library when I looked up to find my son standing in the doorway, water dripping from his coat onto the worn carpet. "James?" I said, genuinely surprised. He hadn't visited me at work since his college days. "Is everything all right?" He looked different. Thinner than at the wedding, with dark circles under his eyes that his expensive glasses couldn't disguise. "Can we talk, Mom?" he asked, his voice carrying an unfamiliar vulnerability. "Somewhere private." We retreated to the small staff room where I made us both coffee, while James sat silently at the table, turning his wedding band around his finger in an anxious gesture I'd never seen before. "What's going on?" I asked gently once we were settled. He looked up, and for a moment I glimpsed the little boy who had come to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting me to make everything better. "I think I've made a terrible mistake," he said finally. My heart constricted, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of mistake?" "With Amanda, with everything." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made my chest ache. "Since the wedding, things have gotten intense. She monitors my calls, checks my emails, tells me which friends I can see." I took a slow sip of coffee, careful not to show the vindication I felt. "That sounds controlling." "It's not just that," he continued, words now tumbling out as if a dam had broken. "She's systematically cut me off from everyone except her family and their social circle. My college roommate Mark came to town last month, and she created this whole scene about how I was choosing him over her when I wanted to meet him for drinks." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "And work. She's been pushing me to leave my firm and join her father's friend's practice. I built my career at Preston Wallace and Baker. I've worked toward partnership for years, but Amanda says it's not prestigious enough for her circles." "Have you tried talking to her about how this makes you feel?" I asked. James laughed bitterly. "Any disagreement turns into hours of arguments, where somehow I end up apologizing for things I didn't even do. And then there's what happened with you." My pulse quickened. "What about me?" "She lied, Mom." He looked me directly in the eyes for the first time since arriving. "About what she said to you at the wedding. I heard her tell her sister about it," laughing about putting you by the bathroom because you didn't fit their aesthetic. The confirmation of what I'd known all along should have felt satisfying. Instead, it just made me sad. Sad for James, sad for the family relationship that had been damaged, sad that Amanda's insecurities had created such unnecessary pain. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," I said. "No, I'm the one who should be sorry," James insisted, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't believe you. My own mother. I took her word over yours." We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of rain against the window filling the space between us. "What happens now?" I finally asked. James shook his head. "I don't know. I love her, or at least I thought I did, but I don't recognize myself anymore. I barely talk to my old friends. I haven't called you properly in months. I'm constantly walking on eggshells." I reached across the table and took his hand, noticing how cold his fingers felt. "What do you need from me, James?" The question seemed to surprise him. Perhaps he'd expected me to immediately tell him to leave Amanda, or to say, "I told you so." Instead, I was offering what I should have offered from the beginning: support without judgment. "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess I needed to tell someone the truth, and I needed that someone to be you." We talked for over an hour, James gradually revealing more details about his increasingly strained marriage. Amanda's jealousy had extended beyond me to any woman in James's professional or social circles. Her expectations for their lifestyle had created financial pressure, despite their combined substantial incomes. The Preston family's influence permeated every aspect of their lives, from which restaurants were acceptable to which political opinions James could express in public. "It's like I'm playing a role in someone else's life," he concluded, "and I'm not doing it very well." As our conversation wound down, I carefully avoided giving direct advice. This was James's marriage, his life, and his decision. My role wasn't to tell him what to do, but to create a safe space where he could find his own answers. "You're welcome to stay with me if you need some time to think," I offered. He shook his head. "Amanda's at a charity event tonight. I should be home when she returns." The resignation in his voice spoke volumes. As I walked him to the library entrance, he turned to me with a question. "The lake house. Do you ever go there anymore?" "I spent a week there in July," I replied. "It was healing." "I miss that place," he said softly. "I miss a lot of things." After James left, I returned to my pottery display, my hands moving automatically while my mind processed our conversation. I felt no triumph in learning that my assessment of Amanda had been accurate. Instead, I felt a renewed determination to be available to my son without trying to control his decisions. 2 weeks passed without further contact from James. I resisted the urge to call him, respecting the boundaries that had been established in our relationship. If he needed me, he would reach out again. When my phone rang on a Sunday morning in early November, I was surprised to see both James and Amanda's names on the caller ID. I answered cautiously. "Mom," James's voice sounded steadier than during our library conversation. "Amanda and I would like to come see you. There's something we need to discuss." They arrived that afternoon, an unmistakable tension between them, despite their attempts to present a united front. Amanda was as perfectly groomed as ever, but her usual confidence seemed diminished as she perched on the edge of my sofa. "Thank you for seeing us," James began formally. "Amanda has something she wants to say to you." Amanda cleared her throat, avoiding direct eye contact. "Lois, I owe you an apology. A real one this time." She paused, seemingly struggling with the words. "What I said to you at our wedding was inexcusable. I was cruel and disrespectful, and I've been that way since James and I met." The admission was so unexpected that I found myself momentarily speechless. "James and I have been in counseling," she continued when I didn't respond. "I've had to face some uncomfortable truths about my behavior, not just toward you, but toward many people in James's life." "It's been a difficult few weeks," James added, reaching for Amanda's hand in what appeared to be a genuine gesture of support. "But we're committed to making changes, starting with making things right with you." I studied them both, noting the sincerity in James's expression and what seemed like genuine remorse in Amanda's. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally. "May I ask what prompted this?" Amanda glanced at James before answering. Honestly, realizing I was losing my husband and recognizing patterns from my own family that I swore I'd never repeat. She took a deep breath. My mother systematically isolated my father from his family. I grew up watching it happen, hating it, and then found myself doing exactly the same thing. The vulnerability in her admission was striking. For the first time, I saw Amanda not as the polished, calculating woman who had hurt me, but as someone with her own complicated history and insecurities. Our counselor helped me see that my fear of not being good enough was driving me to control everything and everyone around me, she continued, including making sure James's previous life, including you, was kept at a distance. We're not asking you to forgive and forget immediately, James said. We know rebuilding trust takes time, but we'd like to start over with clear expectations about mutual respect. I considered their words carefully. The anger and hurt I'd carried for months had gradually transformed during my own healing journey. I wasn't the same woman who had walked out of their wedding reception just as they were no longer the same couple who had wounded me so deeply. I'd like that, I said finally. But I need to be clear about something. I will always be James's mother. I won't compete with you, Amanda, but I also won't accept being treated as an inconvenience or an embarrassment. That's fair. Amanda nodded, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time. More than fair given how I've behaved. We spent the next hour establishing new ground rules for our family interactions. There would be regular dinners, sometimes at my house, sometimes at theirs. Holiday celebrations would be planned with input from everyone. Most importantly, James would maintain his relationship with me independently of Amanda's involvement when appropriate. And if there are issues or misunderstandings, James added, we address them directly instead of letting resentments build. As they prepared to leave, Amanda hesitated at the door. This won't be perfect right away, she said with unexpected candor. I'm still working on a lot of issues in therapy. There may be setbacks. Healing isn't linear, I replied, thinking of my own journey over the past months. What matters is the commitment to keep trying. After they left, I sat in my garden watching the late afternoon sun filter through autumn leaves. I felt cautiously optimistic, but also protective of the independent life I'd built during our estrangement. Reconciliation didn't mean returning to old patterns where my identity was primarily defined by my relationship with my son. Over the following months, our family dynamic slowly evolved. There were awkward moments and occasional tensions, but also genuine efforts at connection. Amanda and I would never be best friends, but we developed a respectful relationship based on our mutual love for James and a growing understanding of each other's backgrounds. At Christmas, they invited me to their home for dinner, a small gathering rather than the elaborate Preston family event. As we sat around their dining table, I noticed how James seemed more relaxed, more like his authentic self than he had been since meeting Amanda. A year after the wedding incident, I found myself in a support group meeting, listening to a new member describe a situation painfully similar to my original experience with Amanda. My daughter-in-law treats me like I'm invisible, the woman explained tearfully. I don't know how to maintain a relationship with my son without constantly feeling hurt. During the discussion that followed, I shared my story, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a journey toward self-respect and eventual reconciliation. The turning point wasn't when they apologized, I explained. It was when I decided that being treated with dignity wasn't negotiable. Paradoxically, it was only after I stopped trying so hard to be included that genuine inclusion became possible. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much had changed in a single year. The woman who had stood frozen beside table 19, devastated by cruel words about her age, had transformed into someone stronger, more whole, and paradoxically more connected to her authentic self. The road with James and Amanda would likely always have occasional bumps. Real healing takes time, and old patterns don't disappear overnight. But we were all trying, and that effort, that commitment to treating each other with respect, even when it was difficult, was perhaps the most meaningful gift we could give one another. The deed to the lake house remained in my name, but I had begun including James and Amanda in weekends there occasionally. Perhaps someday it would become their property, as originally intended. For now, though, it remained a symbol of our family's journey, honoring tradition while creating new, healthier patterns for the future. What I had learned through this painful experience was that real love includes respect. Not just the easy love of good times, but the more challenging love that sets boundaries, speaks truth, and sometimes walks away in order to preserve dignity. I had also discovered that it's never too late to reclaim your sense of self-worth or to rebuild relationships on healthier foundations. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family members? How did you balance maintaining your dignity with preserving important relationships? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you deserve respect at any age and any circumstance from anyone who claims to love you.